ARTtech seminar continues. The next speaker represents nothing less than the best finished game of last year, Legend of Grimrock, which is quite of impressive achievement because Finland is the central of game development at this point. So well done. So the company is Almost Human, and we have Antti here presenting. Well, let's see what you're presenting. Welcome on stage.
Thank you, Sonia. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. So I was intending to start off this presentation with showing you the trailer for Legend of Grimrock 2, but since we had some sort of technical difficulties, you can check out the trailer on YouTube or whatever on your own free time. And I sure love a good puzzle, but not at moments like these. So I'm here to talk about the level design and game design of Legend of Grimrock 1 and 2. So just briefly about myself, I'm Antti Tiihonen. I'm one of the co-founders of Almost Human, and I've been working on the industry for roughly about 12 years now. I started off at Fathammer working on 3D mobile games in a pre-iPhone era. Needless to say, the company's bankrupt by now. And after that, I joined Remedy in 2005, where I worked on Alan Wake and its DLCs. And from there, in 2011, I went on to found Almost Human with 3 of my friends, 1 from Remedy and 2 from FutureMark. And at Almost Human, I mostly work with level design and sound effects and ambient music, like in-game ambient music. And I also work as sort of the second game designer. The lead game designer sort of is a Petriar programmer whose dream this whole retro dungeon crawling game has been for more than 10 years now, and he finally got to realize his vision after all these years. And I've been helping him with the game design, sparring ideas and offering critique and enhancement ideas and figuring out how to solve problems with the game design and so on. And I also do plenty of hobby stuff like Ludum Dare game jams and assembly demo scene competitions have been familiar to me, as well as the graphics competitions. And unfortunately this year I'm gonna miss fast graphics because it starts in 30 minutes or so. So Legend of Grimrock series, it's like a modernized take on this genre that a lot of people thought was dead, and it practically was dead for I don't know, 15 years or something. And we released the first game in the spring of 2012. Then 2.5 years later, we released the sequel, Legend of Grimrock 2. And during this year, just 2 or 3 months ago, we released Legend of Grimrock on iPad, and today we released it on iPhone. So after I get home from here, I'm gonna shoot up some tweets and emails to the press. So there's a lot of multitasking involved today. Yeah, and to date, Legend of Grimrock series has sold on desktop platforms alone more than 1 million copies. So let's get right into it about the game design of Grimrock. During the whole project, we were very conscious about aiming to a very specific niche game instead of trying to please everyone. We're a very small developer, and for us it would be like a very difficult uphill battle try to defeat the likes of, say, Grand Theft Auto or Skyrim or, I don't know, Angry Birds or whatever. So it's better to like pick a very small niche where you can be like the very best there is in that niche instead of like drowning into masses, you know. It's better to be like a big fish in a small pond than a small fish in a big pond, in our opinion. And we wanted to create like this modernized take on this classic first-person dungeon crawling games of late 80s and early 90s, such as like Eye of the Beholder and Dungeon Master. And while we were aiming for like a very hardcore niche audience, that didn't necessarily mean that we would have to like make the game very exclusive or inviting. We wanted to make it as accessible as possible without sacrificing the original vision we have. So in retro games, making it more modern involves a lot of like smoothing out the rough edges of like very old game designs and user experience issues. But then again, it's also like an interesting balancing act, because if you smooth out the corners too much, it starts to lose its shape. So we have to be careful on how much are we gonna like modernize and like pick and choose that what is actually important for the heart and soul of the game. Mechanically speaking, we added new like modern conveniences like automap and automatic pickup of like used missile weapons and such. And the game doesn't rely on so-called hidden information that you would just have to know somehow mystically, or you would have to study from a manual. So the game is, in that regard, much more accessible than a lot of the role-playing games of the 80s and 90s. And then, of course, like a more modern graphical presentation makes the game more inviting. If it looks like sleek and nice to play, and if the interface is sleek, it also like makes the game just much more inviting and easier to get into. But as a matter of fact, I think it's more interesting to concentrate on the things that like most of the modern RPG games do, but we chose not to do. Like conscious decisions that what don't we want to do that everyone else is doing, like, because that's actually the thing that differentiates us from all the Skyrims and Fallouts out there. So one pretty big thing, which is also very convenient for a small team like ours, is that we didn't want to have like an epic story and dialogues and lots of NPCs and cinematics and such. Naturally, they're very expensive to produce. It takes a lot of time to produce the art and audio and animation for those. And also, like, writing is not a core strength of our team. You know, our team has a pretty well varied skill set. When you think about its size, it's only 4 people or 7 when we were developing Legend of Grimrock 2, but still writing wasn't like one of those like core strengths of ours. I think the biggest reason for dropping like this very epic and involving story is that we wanted the game to like remain very, very tightly focused and like a sort of a package where there's nothing extra. There's no every time you do something, it's something meaningful, and it's you actually doing stuff instead of observing like other things doing things in the environment. Like it often is with cutscenes that the player is very isolated from actually playing the game. In our game, you are always playing the game yourself, not looking at things happening in the world. also, to keep the game focused, we dropped like things like trading and crafting and procedurally generated infinite item variations. We didn't want like infinite loot in the game because we want it to be like a survival story with like very scarce resources. Like every time when you even find a rock, that's a moment of delight. That doesn't happen in Skyrim. And sorry, Bethesda, that I keep referring to your game so often. It's a good game, but it's a nice counterpoint. I think it's nice to like to compare to your game because it's so similar, but then again very different. And also one thing that a lot of games, especially action RPGs, do is that they make magic and special attacks and such. They make them very straightforward, and it's actually very understandable. Of course, things should be easy for the player to do on the surface, but actually in our case, we wanted to make the magic more convoluted and difficult. I mean, this sounds, for any game designer, it sounds actually pretty bad from the get-go. But actually, what Legend of Grimrock is, as far as the combat is concerned, it's like a rhythm action game. And the fact that you have to draw out the runes on a grid gives like a nice rhythmical variation to your like combat. And, you know, you're clicking on the attack buttons of the characters, and then you have to like perform different actions in there. It just makes the beat more. It gives it a swing. But of course, the biggest and probably most obvious difference to modern role-playing games is that we don't have a free-form three-dimensional movement where you can like move just as like any other person would, go wherever you want to, jump on things, maybe even fly. Instead, our game is strictly constrained on a grid. Every time the player party moves, it takes like a 3-meter step to either front or back or to the sides. And that's something that a lot of like especially gamers of newer generations were kind of confused that, hey, you have the technology, the game actually renders 3D graphics, like why do you artificially constrain yourself to this grid even though the technology is there for you to like implement freeform movement? And but the funny thing is that actually grids are not per se obsolete in any means. Like if you think of chess or other board games, they actually wouldn't be one bit better with freeform movement, right? They would be more difficult to understand. It would be more difficult to like assess the situation and think about your tactics and how much space you have for your units and so on. So I think a lot of those strengths also reflect in our game due to the grid, since we have a lot of puzzles, so it's very easy to like figure out puzzles that work on a grid. But if you would have the same puzzles in a freeform 3D environment, it would certainly be much more difficult to like read what is the size and shape of the room, and where can I step and where can I go. If I step on that pressure plate, what are my next options? If you mix in 3D movement, it could be anything. You could, I don't know, jump over some grids, go diagonally, maybe fly and levitate, who knows. So it's good to have constrictions and clarity if you want to design puzzles. It's easier to think in discrete terms instead of continuous. You know, humans grasp like whole even numbers much more easily than decimal numbers, for example. And a lot of people probably disagree, but I think grid-based movement also like brings a lot of nice flavor and twist to the combat as well. It somehow makes it more tactical, and that there's like much more meaning with your and your enemy's positioning. If you're flanking an enemy, approaching him from the side or the back, there's an actual tactical advantage to it rather than just some number multiplier somewhere deep within the game's logic. If you approach an enemy from behind, you have much more time because it has to move and turn like step by step, and during that time you have time for you to maneuver yourself again to a more advantageous position. And conveniently, grid also like eliminates a lot of like nasty edge cases. Like in Skyrim, once again, everyone has probably done it a few times that they've climbed on top of a rock and shot at an enemy who can't reach you, but you can shoot at it like by your own will, and or you can find some corner where the AI doesn't quite figure out how to do its pathfinding so it can reach you. And but I noticed that I constantly do this in games like Skyrim because it gives me an advantage, but it's actually very boring to play this way. But I still have to do it because it's the better way to play the game. It gives me, the player, an advantage, and I think it's very important. It's like one of our maybe core design philosophies that we always want to avoid cases where the best way to play the game is the most boring way. And I'm sure that people who are designing free-to-play games are confronted with this choice constantly because they often have to like make the game more exciting if they can like make them pay you. But I'm not going to go into free-to-play games here. I'm sure you are all dying to hear more about them, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. And yeah, also one thing that I think sets Legend of Grimrock apart from like modern AAA games is that our levels they're not afraid to look like actual levels from a game, as opposed to like sets from a movie, like a Lord of the Rings. Our levels are very unashamed that this is a game. Our game's levels are in spirit closer to Pac-Man than Call of Duty in that regard. But yeah, of course our game's design had plenty of challenges as well, and unsolved issues like it's grid-based in real time where movement is smoothly animated between the grid cells. So there's a lot of edge cases that are kind of unclear and so on. But what we actually often chose to do with like these unresolved issues is that we try to like hide them, or at least not draw any attention to it. Like, for instance, our game is there's a party of 4 characters, but then again, you can freely turn the camera if you want to look at the scenery. But that's actually kind of weird if you think about it, because the camera doesn't represent any actual character in the game world. It's much more abstract. But then you can do an action that feels like turning someone's head. So that's just one of those things that, sure, we've realized that if someone thinks about this thing, it feels strange. It might even feel problematic, but we just choose to ignore the problem and it goes away. This is not something that I recommend to do on very, very big design issues, but for small things like this, it's just better to sweep them under a rug and move on. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about level design. There you can see the dungeon editor, which is the tool that we use to create the levels for Legend of Grimrock 2. The tool is actually included within the game. So if you got the game, you can create your own levels. It's easy and fun, but there's also plenty of depth. So if you want to try it out, I highly recommend it. So in our game, I think like level design is at a very important position, especially so since we have a lot of puzzles, like a shitload of them, one might say. Because in a puzzle-heavy game, the level design either makes or breaks the game. You don't want to spend like 1/3 of your time working on puzzles that are boring or dull or repetitive or, I don't know, maybe even too difficult, which we might be guilty of at times. When designing levels, it's always of utmost importance to to make sure that the player knows where he is heading to, and that's where the audiovisual design of the levels steps in. You know, since we don't have randomly generated levels, we want to take everything we can from the fact that we can place every single object just where we want them to be in the game world, and we can use these to guide the player without him knowing that we know that okay, this is like the place where the player needs to end up sooner or later. We can sort of very gently nudge him towards there with clever use of lighting and landmarks and smaller objects scattered along the path. If there's like a log laying on the side of a path, it kind of tends to deflect the player to a certain direction. And if you consciously take advantage of these things, you can, without the player realizing, manipulate his gameplay very, very easily. So I like to think of players' movement through the level as if it's like some liquid that you pour from a bucket into the level, and you can think and visualize in your head that where would the liquid flow, what is the path of least resistance for the liquid to flow through the level. And if there's some place where there's a lot of turbulence, the liquid doesn't really know where it should flow. You can think of ways that is there something that I can do to attract it more towards here and deflect away from there. When designing the levels, it's very, very important to visualize in your head that how does the player itself experience the level, and not just think of it as a designer who already knows everything in advance and maybe even looks at the level from a god's perspective from above, which the player doesn't do. So it's important to keep on playing through the level and trying to get into the mood that okay, I don't know anything about this level in advance, so where would I go and why would I go there, and so on. Things like composition, I think, are very important when designing a level. Like a traditional image composition, the stuff that painters and photographers utilize in their work. And I actually think that it's very beneficial for level designers to study these things as well. It's not difficult stuff, things like contrasts and sorry, rule of thirds and so on. You can very easily utilize them to draw the player's attention where you want the attention to be. If there's something that you need the player to see, it's better to place it compositionally in such a location that the player automatically is guided to look towards there without doing something nasty, say forcing the camera I think Gears of War 1 did. They had a button. If there's something interesting going on, there's an on-screen prompt that press Y to look at interesting thing. I think that's very flawed level design, in my opinion. It's like movie people have this mantra of show, don't tell, and I think it applies to level design and game design as well. It's always better that the player is shown things instead of them being pushed down the player's throat. But then again, once you know how to do these things, you should also try to be subtle, and you don't have to be like perfect. You know, if everything falls together like too conveniently, then the game might start to feel scripted. So you kind of have to like retain a relaxed attitude about it and let the players be players. Don't make like too small funnels for the player to walk through. You know, give him freedom because freedom is always fun in games. And over there, if you're not familiar with composition, there's some pretty helpful resources. There's like Andrew Lewis's creative illustration book, which is out of print, and technically I think it's like abandonware, so it's widely available on the internet because it's not available everywhere else. But you know, you make your own moral calls if you want to like download the book. And then there's Francis Ching's Architecture, Form, Space and Order, which the scan is from. It's very excellent book on how like actual buildings, how the spaces within those buildings and around the buildings are, and why they are created that way. It's an excellent read, even though if your game is fantastical and grid-based like ours, it's still a very relevant book. And then there, if you prefer video tutorials, there's controlpaint.com's video series on composition, highly recommended. Yeah, Legend of Grimrock 2 has a lot of puzzles. There's 81 puzzles, which I designed in the game, and that's a pretty hefty number since we don't like to do recycling in the game. We don't want to like recreate the same puzzle over and over again. So how can you come up with like so many puzzles in a game, especially so since we just previously had created Legend of Grimrock 1 and we didn't want to replicate its puzzles either, so all the obvious puzzles had been done in Grimrock 1 already. So well, what I like to do is that I have like a big text file in my Dropbox, which I can access from anywhere, and I always write down my puzzle ideas. You know, the puzzle ideas don't have to be, and they actually usually are like they usually are very half-baked and often like very crappy even when I initially get the ideas. But you shouldn't try to filter your like ideas at that stage. Just write it down. It'll be just fine in the text file. It won't take many kilos of your precious memory. You don't have to be afraid of like producing duds, because it often turns out that if you give the idea time to like sort of bake in your brain's like background processing, you can often figure out the solution that how will the very raw puzzle idea actually turn out to be like something pretty decent, or how can you like continue to like improve it until it's something that can be published. And it's often beneficial to like go through the old text file like very systematically and think for a minute of each of those puzzle ideas that, okay, how can I make this work? So the sources I get the ideas often from are like the game mechanics in our own game, the game mechanics in other video games and board games, and then there's like traditional riddles and puzzles and things that happen in movies and in real life. Like the things that happen in your own game, like the ideas based on the game mechanics of your own game, they're very fruitful, especially if they can be combined together. Like our games, gameplay elements are very modular. You know, we can have like pressure plates that are connected to like trap doors on the ground, and we have switches that can be connected to gates, and everything can be like interconnected, and we can, with scripting, we can create pretty like even strange, but then again logical like sequences of events within the game. And since everything can be fitted together like, you know, like Lego blocks basically, you can put them into different combinations in relation to one another. And if you just like very mechanically try to think that how can I combine like a teleporter that is on top of a pit, and then I have a switch that toggles the teleporter, and I have to throw an item into the teleporter at the right time. Like going through these combinations, you can come up with puzzles like just like that. I think a pitfall in many modern games that want to like I'm talking about like AAA games that want to like, you can clearly see that there's been a situation that like a producer has said that, hey, we want puzzles in this game to break up the pacing. And then like the game designers have started to work on some puzzles, and they've produced mini games like lockpicking or maybe sneaking or something like that. And that's often like very unsatisfying for the level designers, because you can't combine those to like come up with new puzzles. You know, if you have a lockpicking minigame, it stays the same lockpicking minigame. If you have a lockpicking event in the game 20 times, you don't actually have 20 puzzles. You just have one puzzle that gets more annoying the longer you play the game. And yeah, once you have like a load of puzzles and you have established like very clear rules in your game that how things actually work, then you can start very carefully breaking the rules, and that way you can also come up with like a couple of more exciting new puzzle ideas. But you have to like be very, very gentle and careful of not overdoing it. Like for instance, in Legend of Grimrock 2, we have taught the player that okay, teleporters work like that. If you walk into a teleporter, you are transported into a place, or if you throw an item into the teleporter, it's transported to the same place. But how about if we have a teleporter that transports items to one place and the player to the other place? What can we actually do with that? So you can kind of like start like fiddling around with the rules if you're careful, or if you're desperate for more puzzles, like we are. We need a lot of them. But yeah, I think like traditional puzzles are nice as well. That's an example of a puzzle I did. The picture on the left is where I got my idea. It's like a puzzle game called Slither Link, which comes from like originally from some old Japanese puzzle magazine from the 80s. And I had been playing it on a Nintendo DS, and I started to think that, okay, this is on a grid and our game is on a grid. Could I come up with something in our game that's similar to this puzzle, but you know, in first-person perspective? And the idea mutated along the way, like puzzle ideas often did, and the puzzle on the right is what I came up with. You know, in the original puzzle, you have to draw a continuous line that connects with itself, and I ended up with a puzzle where you have to like traverse through every square in a room so that a door opens. But if you touch the same square twice, you fail. or if you don't touch all the squares, you fail also. But yeah, what I like to do with puzzles is that since you really usually cannot know the difficulty level of a puzzle in advance, I like to put all of my puzzles first into a test level, and I have the actual game world somewhere, and if there's like a place reserved for a puzzle or a place that needs a puzzle, I go to my test level where I have all the puzzles, and I pick a puzzle that's like perfectly suitable for that specific location in the game. It's very difficult to come up with first come up with requirements for a puzzle, and then a puzzle to match those requirements exactly. It's easier to have a big library of puzzles and then fit them wherever they fit suitably. Yeah, so let's wrap this up. So in essence, I think level design and game design and puzzle design is about communication, how the designer communicates to the player, and what is the language that the designer uses. The designer has to either invent or learn the language that the game speaks, and then remain very consistent in using that same language so that the player actually knows that what you're trying to tell him. And show, don't tell applies here as well. If you can do this without using tutorial screens, you're on a good track. And yeah, nowadays, if you want to have a successful game, you don't have to aim to the very top. Niche is completely fine, because niche nowadays can mean hundreds of thousands of copies or millions of copies even. If you remember where Dota started, it was very much a niche back then. Don't aim to the top. It's always very encouraging to hear that, I know. And yeah, as a final note, don't design the game for yourself, the designer. Probably everyone knows this, but the games are sold for players, so it's very important that the designer actually knows how to play the game from a player's perspective instead of his own. So, any questions or comments or whatever? Can we get some audio to the mic?
Hello. Yes. Okay, questions. Oh, applause first. Woo!
Good. Cheers.
Hi. Did you have any conflicts with the other guys to how much retro can you put in the game? Were there any conflicts no, you can't put that, that's too old?
Yeah, to some extent. I think generally speaking, the other game designer, Petri, he is more retro-minded, and I'm more of the, I don't know if you can say so, the modern force there. So it was a constant balancing act, but then again our game is a balancing act between retro and modern. So it's very suitable that we have both points of view represented.
Questions? Yep.
Hi.
Hello.
I was wondering, how do you come up with ideas that keep the game interesting and maybe completely change the way the player sees the game? For example, in Eye of the Beholder, when you first found out that, hey, there's this level teleports where you need to have these certain items that can take you through them, or let's say the king of dungeon crawling games without 3D graphics, NetHack, which just keeps on giving.
Yeah.
Did you get easily a lot of these kind of ideas, and if so, how did you do it?
Well, ideas are very easy to come up with. It's the difficult bit is actually making them work. So the problem is never ideas. it's always like, what can we do and what works with all the other ideas that we have in the game previously. So yeah, it's more of a practical issue than like an issue of figuring out what's interesting.
Hi. So, how was your game received on iOS platform? Was it successful?
Well, the comments and the reviews have been overwhelmingly positive. The sales, well, they have been okay there. They haven't been anything to like. There's no reason to throw any parties or whatever, but yeah, okay, yeah.
Thanks for the Q&A, and thanks, Antti, once again.
Yep.
Very good presentation.
Yep, no problem.
Applause.
Thank you.